Welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you're here with us today because, well, we're trying to cut through a lot of the noise out there.
Oh, yeah, there's so much noise on this topic.
There really is. And it's funny, if you break your arm, the diagnostic process is it's incredibly straightforward.
Right, you get an X-ray.
Exactly. The doctor points to this jagged white line on a glowing screen, and there is your answer.
Yeah.
It's a clean binary reality.
Broken or not broken. Very simple.
We really like things to be visible like that. We like when a medical issue can be categorized neatly into its own little box.
Humans love boxes.
We do. But what happens when an intensely focused, highly structured woman in her late 40s suddenly finds she can't remember the end of an email she is actively reading?
That's where the boxes fall apart.
Right. What happens when her lifelong ability to just, juggle a career, a family, and a complex schedule just completely evaporates?
Well, you step out of that comforting world of X-rays and into the incredibly murky landscape of neurobiology because there is no imaging machine that can capture the collision of a neurodivergent brain entering midlife.
Which is exactly what we are unpacking from today's stack of clinical research,
Yeah.
psychiatric insights, and neurobiology reports.
It's a really fascinating stack of sources today.
It is. We are looking at the intersection of ADHD and perimenopause. Specifically, we're zooming in on how a drop in estrogen fundamentally alters dopamine receptor sensitivity.
And how that shift basically turns working memory into a frustrating, smudged mental notepad.
Smudged mental notepad. I love that description.
Yeah.
And just to put the sheer scale of this biological collision into perspective, there is this striking statistic from the sources.
Oh, the 2025 study.
Yeah, the 2025 population-based study by Jakobstadter, Smari, and colleagues. They looked at over 5,000 women.
That's a massive sample size.
Huge. And they found that the prevalence of severe perimenopausal experiences was 54.2% in women with ADHD.
Wow.
Compare that to just 30.1% in those without ADHD. The gap there is massive.
It's a staggering difference, really.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why does this midlife transition hit neurodivergent women with such disproportionate force?
Well, society so often dismisses midlife cognitive struggles as just a phase. Or, worse, some sort of psychological frailty.
Right, like you're just not trying hard enough.
Exactly. The idea that women simply lose their edge as they age is this pervasive and incredibly damaging myth. But the clinical sources reveal a profound neurochemical truth here.
It's not psychological frailty.
No, not at all. It is a direct, measurable consequence of interacting neurochemical systems. To understand why working memory crashes so spectacularly for someone with ADHD during this time, we have to completely overhaul our understanding of what estrogen actually does in the body.
Because most of us grew up with the basic biological framing that estrogen is just the reproductive hormone, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's what we're taught.
Its job is to manage the menstrual cycle, support pregnancy, handle the reproductive system. But the neurobiology research paints a totally different picture.
A completely different picture. It operates as a vital brain chemical.
So it's in the brain, too.
Oh, the brain is saturated with estrogen receptors. We are talking about specific receptors like ER alpha, ER beta, and GPER.
Okay.
And they aren't just sitting in random quiet corners of the brain either. They are heavily concentrated in the very areas critical for executive function and emotional regulation.
So the areas that ADHD affects the most.
Precisely. You find them in the prefrontal cortex, which handles, complex planning and sustained attention. They are clustered in the striatum, the area that drives our motivation and reward-seeking behavior. They're embedded in the hippocampus, which forms our memories, and in the amygdala, which acts as our threat detection center.
That's basically the whole command center.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is that estrogen operates in these areas as a master neuromodulator. It isn't carrying your thoughts or holding your memories itself, but it powers the systems that perform those tasks.
I see. So if we think of the brain as this massive, bustling city, estrogen isn't the cars on the road or the people working in the offices.
Right.
Estrogen is the city's electrical grid. Or actually, maybe an even better way to visualize it based on these papers,
Yeah.
it's like a central Wi-Fi signal booster.
I like that. A Wi-Fi booster.
It's the invisible infrastructure that keeps the entire network stable so the data packets can actually transfer from point A to point B without dropping.
Yes, that invisible infrastructure is constantly humming in the background, maintaining the voltage, so to speak, of your cognitive processes.
So when the voltage
When
drops.
that voltage fluctuates, the whole network experiences brownouts.
But wait, let me push back on that for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
If estrogen is just powering the broader grid, why do some women coast through this midlife transition feeling mostly fine?
That's a great question.
Like, maybe they experience a few hot flashes or occasional fatigue, while others feel like their executive function is literally shutting down and they can barely function at work. Is it just a matter of the sheer volume of estrogen they happen to lose?
It is actually less about the total amount of estrogen lost and far more about what that specific electrical grid was supporting in the first place.
Oh, okay.
Because every brain is wired slightly differently. In the context of ADHD, we have to look at estrogen's intimate, vital dance with a very specific neurotransmitter,
Dopamine.
dopamine. That chemical relationship brings us to the core of what ADHD actually is on a biological level.
Right, because if estrogen powers the brain's grid, the appliances plugged into that grid are the neurotransmitters.
Exactly.
And for the ADHD brain, the single most critical appliance plugged into the wall is the dopamine system. I mean, dopamine is essentially the currency of focus.
It absolutely is. It drives working memory, task initiation, emotional steadiness. And the clinical literature shows that estrogen acts as a massive dopamine booster.
A booster, right?
It does this in 4 very specific mechanical ways. First is synthesis. Estrogen actively upregulates an enzyme called tyrosine hydroxylase.
Tyrosine hydroxylase. Okay, let's break that down for the listener.
Think of this enzyme as the production line supervisor in a neurotransmitter factory. When estrogen is present and stable, that supervisor is constantly demanding that the factory manufacture more dopamine.
So the raw materials get converted efficiently.
Right, and your dopamine stores replenish quickly.
Okay, so estrogen literally helps manufacture the chemical required for focus. That's the first way. What's the second mechanism the sources outline?
The second is release. The brain doesn't just leak dopamine in a constant, steady stream. It releases it on demand when you need to, say, plan a project or solve a problem or stay motivated through a really tedious task.
And estrogen helps with that.
Yes. Estrogen enhances this on-demand release, especially in the prefrontal cortex and the striatum, making sure the dopamine is actually deployed when you face a cognitive challenge.
Okay, so it makes it and it releases it. What's number 3?
The third mechanism focuses on the cleanup. Because once dopamine is released, it doesn't stay in the synapse forever. There is an enzyme called EOMT, that's COMT, or catechol-O-methyltransferase.
Let's just stick with COMT.
Yeah, COMT is much easier. Its entire job is to act as a cleanup crew, breaking down dopamine and clearing it away. And estrogen actively suppresses COMT.
Going through the research stack, I found this part particularly fascinating. Because it's not just about producing more dopamine, it's about keeping it active.
Exactly.
Estrogen essentially tells the cleanup crew to take a long lunch break. By suppressing COMT, the dopamine that does manage to get released gets to stay in the synapse and do its job for a much longer period of time.
Which brings us to the fourth and perhaps most critical way estrogen supports the dopamine system, especially for those with ADHD, receptor sensitivity.
Ah, right, because having the dopamine isn't enough.
No, it isn't enough to just have it floating around. That dopamine needs to bind to a receptor to actually trigger a response. Estrogen actively tunes the D1 and D2 dopamine receptors.
It tunes them.
Yes, it makes these receptors highly sensitive and efficient. In neuroscience, there is a concept known as the inverted U-curve of dopamine performance.
Right, meaning you need just the right amount of dopamine to function well.
Exactly.
If you have too little, you're foggy, unmotivated, and distracted. But if you have too much, you tip over the other side of the curve into anxiety, overwhelm, and hyperfixation. You need to be hovering right at the top of that curve.
Estrogen is the calibrator that helps keep receptor sensitivity hovering right in that optimal sweet spot. It ensures the signal is received loud and clear without overwhelming the system.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If dopamine is the key that unlocks your ability to hold on to a thought, estrogen is the locksmith, making sure that key perfectly fits the lock.
That's a fantastic way to look at it.
And for you listening, this is where the biology hits reality. ADHD is fundamentally a dopamine regulation issue. An ADHD brain is already starving for dopamine.
Its baseline production and receptor sensitivity are naturally lower.
So when estrogen begins its unpredictable decline during perimenopause, the ADHD brain loses its locksmith. It loses the production supervisor.
It loses the mechanism that keeps the cleanup crew in check.
It loses one of its most vital chemical scaffolds.
And when that chemical scaffolding falls away, the real-world impact is profound. We see this most clearly in the prefrontal cortex, which relies incredibly heavily on optimal dopamine levels.
And the immediate casualty of this decline is working memory.
Yes, working memory takes a direct hit.
Because working memory is basically your brain's active RAM. It's the ability to hold information in your mind while you are actively manipulating or using it.
Like holding a phone number in your head just long enough to dial it.
Exactly. Or walking into a room and remembering what you went in there for. Or reading a complex email and actually retaining the context of the first paragraph by the time you reach the sign-off.
Right. When estrogen drops and the dopamine receptor sensitivity plummets along with it, that capacity shrinks.
The sources describe the resulting cognitive state as a smudged mental notepad.
I see that in clinical anecdotes all the time. Information goes in, but the ink just blurs before you can actually read it back to yourself.
Oh.
Because women with ADHD already possess subtle neurodevelopmental differences in the brain networks governing executive function, the loss of this estrogen booster doesn't just cause a mild inconvenience. It leads to a severe executive function decline.
This perfectly explains the phenomenon where lifelong coping strategies suddenly collapse.
Yes, absolutely.
Because women with ADHD are notoriously resilient. They spend decades building elaborate, sometimes exhausting systems to mask their underlying dopamine deficit.
Oh, the masking is intense.
They rely on complex, color-coded planners, a barrage of phone alarms, sticky notes on every single surface.
And often the high anxiety adrenaline of last-minute deadlines just to force their brain to focus.
Yeah, but when they hit their late 30s, 40s, or early 50s, the cognitive load of life is usually at its peak. Career demands are high, family logistics are complex, then the estrogen drops.
And suddenly, those lifelong coping mechanisms aren't enough. Tasks become impossibly hard to initiate. Sequential planning is entirely disrupted.
It is a systemic collapse of the brain's organizational infrastructure, which is why the clinical literature reflects such a massive surge in women experiencing a first-time formal ADHD diagnosis in midlife.
They haven't suddenly caught ADHD.
Right.
The scaffolding that allowed them to function despite the ADHD has been removed.
Which raises a really practical question. If a woman without ADHD goes through perimenopause, she often experiences brain fog, forgetfulness, and fatigue. Right? And if a woman with ADHD goes through it, her working memory crashes and her executive function evaporates. How does a doctor, or how do you, the listener, trying to figure out your own shifting mind, tell the difference between standard perimenopausal brain fog and the unmasking of severe ADHD?
The differential diagnosis really relies on looking at the timeline of a patient's life. Standard perimenopausal brain fog correlates directly with hormonal fluctuations.
So it appears later in life.
Yes, tracking with the decline in estrogen, and it often improves or stabilizes once a woman reaches postmenopause and the brain adapts to the new hormonal baseline.
But ADHD is different.
ADHD symptoms leave a lifelong footprint.
Right. The clues were always there in childhood, high school, or their 20s, even if they were quiet or internalized as anxiety.
Exactly. The drop in estrogen does not cause ADHD. It unmasks a neurodevelopmental condition that was present from birth.
It was just previously hidden by the masking effects of high cyclical estrogen.
High estrogen and youthful cognitive reserve. The scaffolding basically hid the structural difference for decades.
But the loss of dopamine and the resulting working memory crash, that's only half the story, right?
Oh, yes, it gets more complicated.
Because the brain isn't just losing its ability to focus and plan. It is actively gaining stress. And that brings us to what the sources refer to as double hit.
The double hit. This represents a biological collision that truly takes a toll on cognitive health. Estrogen doesn't just interact with dopamine, it also heavily regulates the HPA axis.
The HPA axis, that stands for the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands, right?
Yes, and this system is the body's primary internal alarm network.
Okay, so if we break that down, the hypothalamus acts as the smoke detector, sensing a threat. The pituitary is the control center that takes that signal and sends a message downward. And the adrenal glands are the firefighters that release cortisol, the stress hormone, into the bloodstream to prepare the body for action.
That's a perfect analogy. And estrogen is the stabilizing force that keeps those firefighters calm, ensuring they only deploy when there is an actual fire.
So what happens when estrogen drops?
Without stable estrogen levels signaling that everything is okay, The stress system becomes highly overreactive. The threshold for what constitutes a threat lowers significantly.
Wow.
As a result, basal cortisol, your baseline background level of stress hormone, begins to creep upward and stay elevated.
When the sources talk about basal cortisol creeping up, I feel like this is that visceral physical feeling you get when you're sitting on your couch on a Tuesday night doing absolutely nothing but your chest is tight
Yes, your heart is beating a little too fast.
and your body feels like it's bracing for an imminent disaster. You are flooded with a physiological stress response without any external stressor.
Now combine that with the dopamine deficit we just discussed. This creates a severe biological clash in the brain.
It's a double hit.
Exactly. You can think of dopamine as the strategist. It handles the logical planning, the sustained focus, and the working memory. Cortisol, on the other hand, is the security officer.
And its only job is threat detection and immediate survival.
Right. During perimenopause for an ADHD brain, the strategist is completely under-resourced because dopamine receptor sensitivity is shot. Meanwhile, the security officer is jumpy, overreactive, and armed to the teeth because cortisol is constantly surging.
Imagine sitting down to do complex spreadsheet analysis for work. That task relies heavily on your prefrontal cortex and your working memory.
Right, the strategist.
Now imagine trying to complete that task while someone is standing right next to your desk, blaring an air horn in your ear at random intervals. The air horn is the cortisol.
It's impossible.
No wonder the mental notepad is completely smudged. You cannot perform complex cognitive tasks when your brain's security system is screaming that you are in danger.
And it goes even deeper than momentary distraction, unfortunately.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the research highlights that chronic, elevated cortisol physically alters the brain over time. It actively weakens the dendrites. Those are the tiny connection branches between neurons, specifically in the prefrontal cortex.
So it's causing physical damage to the focus center.
Yes. And it also reduces the production of BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, in the hippocampus.
Which is basically fertilizer for the brain, right?
Exactly. It promotes the growth and survival of neurons. So when cortisol reduces BDNF, it physically degrades your working memory capacity and your overall cognitive resilience.
So what does this all mean? All of this tells a very clear, vindicating story for anyone experiencing it.
Highly vindicating.
The emotional volatility, the sudden bouts of crying in the car, the overwhelming frustration over minor inconveniences, the complete cognitive overload when asked to make a simple decision. None of this is a personality change.
No, it is a literal physiological state change in the brain.
You have not lost your intelligence. You are operating a complex machine with a drastically reduced neurotransmitter stabilizer alongside an overactive stress signaling system.
Acknowledging that mechanical failure naturally pushes us toward the solutions outlined in the research. If the grid is failing and the neurotransmitters are dysregulated, how do we physically intervene and rebuild that scaffolding?
Well, the sources don't just leave us stranded with the neurobiology of the problem, thankfully. They point to highly actionable, integrated solutions.
Yes, they do.
And the first integrated solution often discussed in the clinical data is HRT, or hormone replacement therapy.
Right. But it is vital to frame HRT correctly in this context. Hormone replacement does not treat ADHD itself.
It doesn't replace the dopamine.
No. What it does is stabilize the fluctuating estrogen environment. By providing a steady baseline of estrogen, it mitigates the severe dopamine dysregulation and calms the overactive HPA axis.
It restores the electrical grid so that the brain isn't constantly dealing with power surges and blackouts.
Exactly. But because it doesn't treat the underlying structural differences of ADHD, we have to look at medication adjustments for the actual executive function deficits.
So if someone is already taking stimulant medication, their standard dose might suddenly stop working during perimenopause.
Yes, because their hormone levels are shifting the receptor sensitivity.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
The sources specifically note that certain medications, like lisdexamfetamine, which is widely known as Vyvanse, have been shown in clinical trials to improve memory, reasoning, and executive function, specifically in menopausal women.
But the clinical literature strongly warns against the danger of treating only one side of this equation.
Oh, this is important.
Treating the hormonal fluctuations with HRT without addressing the underlying unmasked ADHD leaves the patient struggling with executive function. Conversely, treating the ADHD with increasing doses of stimulants without stabilizing the wild hormonal fluctuations yields highly incomplete results.
It's exactly like patching half a roof and then wondering why water is still pouring into your living room during a storm.
Exactly. Both systems, the hormones and the neurotransmitters, they must be addressed in tandem.
And we absolutely cannot ignore the lifestyle foundations either. Because as the estrogen drops, the margin for error in the brain becomes practically non-existent.
The buffer is gone.
Yeah. A bad night of sleep in your 20s might make you groggy.
Yeah.
A bad night of sleep in perimenopause can completely derail your executive function for days.
Absolutely. The research highlights prioritizing dietary protein because protein provides the essential amino acids that act as the literal building blocks your body uses to manufacture dopamine.
And other crucial neurotransmitters, too.
Right. Exercise is heavily emphasized because physical movement directly increases both dopamine release and that crucial brain growth fertilizer, BDNF.
And sleep hygiene is non-negotiable because sleep deprivation directly spikes cortisol.
Which feeds right back into that double hit stress loop.
Beyond the medications and the lifestyle adjustments, the overarching theme in the research is the immense therapeutic power of psychoeducation.
Yes, just having this conversation.
Just knowing that this cognitive crash is driven by a mechanical, biological mechanism changes the entire narrative. Knowing that the engine of your mind is still perfectly intact, but the fuel pressure has just dropped, strips away so much of the shame, guilt, and self-blame that women internalize during this transition.
It reframes the internal monologue from, I am failing at life, to my neurochemistry is shifting and I need different tools to manage it.
Let's pull all these threads together and summarize the journey we've taken through these sources. We started by completely rethinking estrogen, moving away from the idea that it's just a reproductive hormone, and recognizing it as a master neuromodulator.
One that tunes dopamine receptor sensitivity and acts as the brain's electrical grid.
We explored how its unpredictable decline during perimenopause pulls the neurochemical rug out from under the prefrontal cortex. This shatters working memory and executive function,
Creating a profound crisis for those who already navigate the world with the baseline dopamine deficit of ADHD.
Then we examined how the double hit compounds this crisis. The drop in estrogen removes the brakes on the body's stress system, causing cortisol to surge.
And the collision of a starved dopamine strategist and a panicking cortisol security officer creates the perfect storm of midlife cognitive overload.
Physically altering the brain's connection branches. But the research also provides a roadmap out of the fog, with integrated dual-focus solutions stabilizing the grid with HRT, tailoring ADHD medication to the new hormonal reality, and rigorously defending lifestyle foundations that scaffolding can be rebuilt.
It absolutely can.
If you take away just one central insight from the clinical data we've unpacked today, let it be this. Nothing is fundamentally broken about who you are. You are biologically consistent. Your brain is reacting exactly how a human brain should react when its vital chemical scaffolding shifts. The smudged mental notepad is biology, not a character flaw.
Zooming out to connect this biology to the bigger picture, the sources leave us with an incredibly provocative question.
Oh, what's that?
If estrogen acts as such a powerful neuromodulator that it can quietly mask significant neurodevelopmental differences like ADHD for decades, it makes you wonder about human behavior at large.
Oh, wow.
How much of what society considers typical female behavior or typical female personality traits like extreme multitasking and high empathy throughout the lifespan is actually just the side effect of optimal neurotransmitter scaffolding driven by youthful estrogen?
That is a massive question.
Right. And if the medical community treated the female brain's chemistry with as much nuance and respect as we treat its psychology, how many more women could unlock and sustain their true cognitive potential well into the second half of their lives?
It shifts the entire paradigm of how we view aging and neurodivergence. We started this deep dive talking about a broken X-ray machine. Unlike a fractured bone, the collision of ADHD and the menopausal transition is completely invisible to the naked eye. There's no clean, jagged white line to point to on a screen.
But just because you can't see the mechanisms doesn't mean the impact on your life isn't entirely real.
Exactly. The scaffolding may be invisible, but once you finally understand how it is built, you possess the power to rebuild it.